So we start this first, and then we take 5 seconds of quiet, and then I'll say why hello, and you can respond however, and I'll take the lead to get things going. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Why hello.
Konnichiwa.
And you have to get closer to the mic.
Oh, sorry.
All right, let's do it again. Why hello.
Konnichiwa.
That's a new response.
Oh, you know.
My Dale, what long blonde hair you have.
The better to braid with?
So this week, Dale is not here this weekend. We're going to talk about where he is next weekend. But I have a guest co-host today, and we're going to have a conversation that has been kind of percolating for a while in your life, and I thought was a really interesting conversation to have. And I think it's kind of an eternal question for modern Catholic parents. But before we get to that question, do you want to talk a little bit about your background, like education, and then kind of what you've been doing recently?
Yeah. It's good to be back on. Thanks for having me. So my background is in English secondary education, and that stems from a lifelong love of reading and also writing. So after graduating with a degree and license in education, I opted for my master's in children's literature at Kansas State University. Go Wildcats. And after that, moved back to Colorado, and I was teaching in the community colleges, so a couple of those. And so I spent several years, instead of going straight into the high school to teach literature, I was actually teaching writing in the college. And from there, actually moved on to continue writing more professionally, especially in marketing. So, and that's currently what I do for contracting.
It's your day job.
That's my day job. It's what puts food on the table. So you can say that I eat my words on a regular basis.
Right?
Nice.
Nice.
That's my favorite joke. Anyway, so though that's my main day job, I have had the wonderful opportunity recently to be a teacher again for a group of homeschool students for doing an enrichment program. So that's what I've been doing a bit this fall, and we've had a really fun run with lots of different types of imaginative literature from all sorts of genres.
Yeah. And what is the class supposed to do? Like, what's the purpose of the class? Did it talk about, or were you able to create, like, your course objective?
Really, I was told by the gal putting it together that, it was supposed to be mostly about engaging with books, falling in love with reading, and sharing the joy of what we encounter together. So there is not lit theory in this, even though I myself love, putting on the lens and looking at some stories from different angles. Like, that's not what this is about.
And that can ruin reading sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. There's the books that you hate because they were taught to death. And that's nothing to say to any English teachers out there or any literature teachers out there. That is your role. And I learned a heck a lot from my classes and literature classes in doing that. So this is no diss on you. But sometimes, like, if only we had learned a little less, right? We would have gotten so much more out of these books.
That's maybe. A lot of, I think, subjects is you can kind of overlearn it, and it can become something that you don't enjoy anymore. So that's kind of a neat premise that you're able to begin with. So just helping kids to come together, enjoy reading, and then grow, probably, I would assume, like, through discussion, and seeing how people respond to the different perspectives or the different premises, because literature is an art, and so there isn't necessarily a uniform interpretation of meaning, which can be problematic too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, not like informational literature, which, is fact, and that's one right answer, mostly. Like imaginative literature, the author is trying to have you have an experience, and so everybody else is bringing their own background and experience to that, which it's an experience that only you can have by the reading of the book. And so that's what's really nice about the discussions, and when the students come up with their own insights and questions, and it's really great when they answer each other's questions and really dig into it.
Awesome.
I get to enjoy that.
And you're teaching middle school and high school. Do you want to share the books that you guys are reading right now?
Yeah, right now for the middle schoolers, we've worked our way up to To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a very beautiful story, which it's challenging in its subject matter, but it's accessible to those readers. And they've had a lot of really wonderful things to say about the characters, and they found that the courtroom scene very compelling. So we're not quite at the end of that book yet, but they'll see how everything unfolds with that story. And then for the high schoolers, we're reading Willa Cather's Death Comes for the Archbishop, which is a book that I wouldn't say has a plot. It's like a collection of experiences, but they all come together in this, I would say, beautiful, poignant climax at the end, if you can even call it. It's not like a traditional standard plot climax. But...
So thinking about it in like a film lens, I can't even think of like a movie that would do that, but it's the kind of movie where you're following a lot of different like storylines that seem to be disparate and then come together.
It's like slice of life, I would almost say. Like, that's the closest analogy I can think of to the film and TV genre, is that it's slice of life. You have these little experiences and character encounters with the two leads, Father Latour and Father Vaillant, which I don't know French, so I'm probably mispronouncing those names, but I do my best. But it's their experience of coming to the I'm forgetting the exact dates, but the pre-Civil War era of New Mexico, and encountering all the cultures there and the challenges of two French priests dealing with an American in name, but Mexican in heritage, and obviously lots of Native American cultures around them. That get crazy hodgepodge of cultures there.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I've never heard of that book. Is it a recent publish, or
no? It's just always fairly old.
There?
Yeah, okay. So Willa Cather, I would say, is a really good American lit author. So she also wrote "O Pioneers," which got a lot of attention, and "My Antonia," are some of her other titles. But "Death Comes to the Archbishop" is that's my fave. And she's not Catholic, but she captures a lot of really, I would say, poignant spiritual experiences, almost better than some Catholics that I know. So I would recommend the book. It's a really good read. Yeah.
Well, there was a situation when you were putting together your syllabus and your reading list, or your order, I guess, did they have to buy the books then?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so your book list prior to classes starting, and you had like a particular book on there, and some of the parents wrote back in challenging your book list as being a problematic book list, and then you responded. Could you talk through that situation a little bit about the book and the pushback and then your response?
Yes, and I'm going to preface this by saying, parents, if you want to ask a teacher why they have a list or they have a certain book on their list, ask, because it's really good for that conversation. You don't have to just accept a title if you're not sure about it. But also, be open-minded to some things. Don't just judge a book by its cover, if you will.
Or the back.
Or the back cover. That's kind of where this
spiel
situation came from for us. So in this class, the point is to encounter a lot of different genres, of imaginative literature. So we've read historical fiction, we've read just straight realism, we also read speculative fiction, so fantasy was the title, and the title that I put on for this semester was The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill, which is a beautiful book. It was a Newbery winner, which for a fantasy title is pretty impressive. Normally, Newbery winners are more for realism or historical fiction, but it won the Newbery. And not just for its accolades, because children, even book awards, they have their own foibles, but the story itself, when I read it, I cried, which I don't cry at books, but there was a simplicity, and yet depth that spoke to young readers as easily as it did to adult readers. So this fantasy features witch characters. So you can already see where I'm going with this.
With a T, not which characters.
Yeah,
who's on first?
Yeah. What's on second?
Yeah,
I don't know,
so someone read the back cover a parent.
Yes.
As they were, or, you know, they got on the Amazon page and were like, what are these books? They actually took the time to look it up, which kudos to that parent for at least trying to see what people were being asked to read. And a parent said, oh, wait, I don't think that this is a good thing. This includes witchcraft, where we don't want to promote witchcraft. And you're at a specifically Catholic kind of homeschool school. Yeah,
so all of these students are Catholic. And so the parent was very concerned when they read the word witch on the back cover. And so just immediately drew the assumption that this has witches in it, there is witchcraft, and I do not want my children to read it. I am not going to let my child take your class. Which... Yes.
And she, what was interesting, and it actually was a God thing, from what I recall of the story, is did she reply just to you, or did she reply to everyone?
She replied through...
Oh, so it didn't come to you?
It didn't come to me directly. It came to me secondhand.
That's more what I would have expected.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so was the more expected avenue.
Yeah, so, but when I received this, I was like, well, I believe I have a pretty strong case for this book, if you'll allow me to... write out my rationale, because I do have a reason for putting all the books on our reading list
and you're
for these students.
A lovely Catholic mother, very faithful Catholic woman, always have been.
Trying to be,
it's
you know?
Yeah, you're kind of like called out, like they asked for your Catholic card, I think.
A little bit, maybe. I don't know.
Do you want to explain?
Well, and it's also, I don't know, I think maybe I'm the enemy is a little too hard to put it, but I am a traditionally trained teacher for the public school system / classroom.
Although you've never worked really in the public system.
I've never worked in the public school system, hilariously. Anyway, so my response was, I had quite a few points. One being that this book is in the fantasy realm, the genre itself, so it uses devices and elements that we don't find in our real world. And one of the biggest devices is magic. And for magic users, the words that we have in English, traditionally we have things like mage or wizard or sorcerer, and those technically refer to different things and different uses, but when you come right down to it, we don't have a lot of other words to specify somebody who uses magic, especially in a book for young readers. So witch is the name given to somebody who is using this device in the book. But witchcraft, as we understand it, especially from a Catholic point of view, did not exist in this book. In fact, one of the biggest premises of the book was to take somebody's magic away from them, like to get it out of them, because it was going to be a danger to them as they grew. But in terms of the elements of magic that were in the story, it was throughout the story, yes, but that wasn't even the key point. Most of it was character interactions. And there was a lot of beautiful themes, especially of motherhood and family generations and sorrow versus hope and passing the torch in some ways. But I'm not doing it justice, just the beauty that this book took with this story. And it opens kind of in a surprising way, and I won't spoil it for those who actually want to read it, but my students came to me the first day we were talking about it. They were like, really? That's how this book opened? And it's like, yeah, but it's letting you know that, oh, there's going to be some serious things to overcome for the characters and for the populace in general. Anyway,
so you guys have already read this book as a class?
Yes, and my students really enjoyed it.
I was going to ask, what was their response? Did they have good discussions?
Oh, yeah.
And were there discussions based on a humanistic lens or through a Catholic lens?
Oh, a Catholic lens. And I think that that's been a huge part of our course in general. So we call it the sacramental lens, that with literature itself, God is a creator, and we participate in that identity as those created in the image and likeness of God by what we create. And also it's a way of revealing the nature of God through art. But then also the stories themselves present a lot of scriptural truths, a lot of references that we could tie to saints or call back. So we try to read for those things and talk them out. So,
and that's the kind of lens you won't see presented in a traditional college course.
Nope. There is no such thing as sacramental lens theory in most secular colleges.
Gosh. I took one theory. I remember narratology or the narrative lens and multicultural cultural lens and this and that kind of stuff. So yes, the
Marxism is big, feminist lens is big.
Oh yeah, feminist lens.
Yeah, So
this is kind of nice that I mean, who knows where they're going to go next with each family, but they're being presented with a liturgical analysis lens that is like really Catholic off the bat. So that's already pretty good.
And going back to the Girl Who Drank the Moon, the other thing I was able to say about it that one being a fantasy and the employ of magic as a device that like traditional, what you would call like real world witchcraft was not present at all. And then like the major themes and the characters and the poignancy of the story, the language used is also really spot on. The final point that I made, which I feel like was the knock it out of the park point, was, well, the author, Kelly Barnhill, is a Catholic. And she actually made a statement on her own website saying she doesn't overtly write about like faith things. Like it's not like allegorical, so you can't just make a direct tie of this character is representing this figure from the Bible or something like that. It's not C.S. Lewis, which God bless C.S. Lewis. I love The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe and all of the series of those books, but even Tolkien didn't like
allegory.
Yeah. He really didn't like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Actually, that was kind of a contention between them. Anyway, that's another conversation.
Oh, that's so funny.
But Kelly Barnhill was writing. She's like, I tried to write my faith into the story, essentially in an indirect way, but for the astute reader is going to pick up on like her faith experiences via that way. She put it a lot more poignantly than I did. But essentially it was like, yeah, so you can't judge a book by its cover, even though it has the word witch on it. You have to be a little bit more discerning about, especially with regards to fantasy, that you can't just assume that it's going to be promoting witchcraft.
Yeah.
So.
And so you had a response and it was received well, and the parent did not like pull their kid out of the class. Yeah. And in fact, you were invited to come and talk to the moms of the school about the question of how do we pick books for our children?
Yes.
And so that's what I really wanted to talk about today, because it's a perennial question. And I'd say, you know, as a parent who has an older kiddo, and you're very well versed in the children's literature department, so we come to you for recommendations periodically, but there's just so much out there, and we have, we don't make it to the library as often as we probably ought to, but we have, you know, books are given to our kiddos by well-meaning family members who might not do the research, and, you know, it turns out the author is very overtly pro, you know, lifestyles that we're not pro, and that they have created allegorical, you know, stories with unicorns in them and, you know, cutesy things, allegorical stories to, you know, back up that particular lens. So it's a scary world occasionally out there, and I have to say it probably has always been a little bit of a scary world for parents because the, you know, world presents change. But what was your response to how do we begin picking books for our children to read?
Well, it's fair to acknowledge the challenges, right? Because we already said there's a lot of stuff out there, and it's because the realm of self-publishing and indie publishing has exploded recently. And also in terms of traditional publishing, a lot of the agents for representation won't even take a glance at your manuscript unless you include certain points of agenda, I would say. Certain characterizations or relationships or this, that, or the other.
Yeah, very overt, I would say, it's very obvious to pick up on that stuff. So you have characters that are, you know, transgender, you have characters that are openly gay, and it's not that we don't like, you know, those type of people, it's that we don't like how the normalization of those lifestyles without any critical like pushback within that framework of the book.
Well, and it's like we want characters with those experiences, but when you feel like as an author I have to shove this type of character in just to check a thing off the box when it doesn't necessarily suit the story as it was being told, that's frustrating.
Yeah.
And it's not always clear on the outset just how deeply they're going to get into certain relationships, especially in the young adult realm. That's a whole nother subject I can get into later. But yeah, so that's a challenge. There's also the challenge of libraries themselves trying to set up the easy grab displays that are, sometimes they're great for promoting a certain subject or topic, or like learn more about this period of history. Other times it's like, we're going to promote this relationship or sexual orientation, which, I mean, for those kids that age, probably don't need to know. So it's inappropriate for the subject matter. So there are a lot of challenges for picking books for kids. I would say it starts with early on, most parents go for like the baby books and the board books and starting reading as early as possible, even to your babies, even if it's just those little feely texture books, or those, what are they called? Indestructibles, that are like made of a certain paper that can't tear and baby slobber and chew all over them and they don't fall apart.
I've never heard of that.
I'll have to get you some. Anyway, so reading to your kids as early as possible is really key for literacy. So don't hesitate to just sit down and let them flip the pages and whatnot. After that, some of it is your own tastes. You can bring back your own favorites from childhood. There's nothing wrong with that. And you could also discover, like, why did I like this book when I was a kid? I've had a couple of those experiences, like, oh, I remember this book, and then I read it again, and I'm like, ugh, this did not age well for me. But also letting kids explore themselves as they get a little bit older, to, like, if they go to the library and they see a nonfiction book about zebras that, like, really draws their attention, then pull that off the shelf and let them flip through it, whatever. It really comes down to when they are old enough, then where you would say they're more in the independent reader stage, so preteen, middle school or whatnot, where the question of what do we pick for our kids becomes problematic. Because I would argue that you should stop picking books for your kids. And I hope that I'm gonna have a pause for everybody who might be listening to do a facepalm or make a face at me or to throw the podcast for their phone across the room.
So I wanted to start with some of your credentials, because I think that's an important thing to know, because a lot of people have strong opinions about this question. And I think everyone has actually strong opinions. And I'm not saying that, like, your opinion is better than others, but you do have a lot of... you have a lot of, like, learning behind your opinion.
Yes.
That I think is worth really pausing and thinking about. And that does start to fly in the face of us, like, I'd say Shiite Catholics who are very distrusting of the world around us, that, like, what? We would let our kids pick a book? Like, but what if it's a book I'm unfamiliar with? And what if that book leads them away from the church? Like, then I'm damaging their soul and... like, kind of take down that whole road. Yeah, and that's a very womanly response. I'm not sure that guys have that response, but, like, women think about, like, the butterfly effect of everything we do. We can see
the snowball rolling down that hill, right? We can project that path much better. I agree with that. I would say, okay, well, when I say don't pick books for your kids, there's several reasons behind that. Most moms that I know, especially the moms group that I just had, most parents that I have talked to about this, what is the end goal? Well, I want my children to read widely and read well, to encounter the classics, to really appreciate and have a love of literature and, like, be able to discern the good stuff. Okay, fair. But you have to hold your horses a little bit. Because, one, are they an engaged reader? Well, you know your kid. You know whether if they had the option, they didn't have any homework or whatnot, they didn't have any chores to do. What would they do? Would they go and grab a book off the shelf to read it on their own, or would they rather do something else? If they are an engaged reader, then I'll save that for the second part. But if they're not as engaged yet, then the important thing isn't for them to dive into the classics right now or dive into real big literature. It's let them read what they want. And that's not to say morally questionable stuff, but I've had parents say, all my kid wants to read are, like, the Barbie books or the books that are, like, the Magic Treehouse serial, or it's based off of a movie or whatnot. It's like, I don't want them to read that. They're like, I know garbage. It's trash. Exactly. But it's like, but your kid wants to enjoy that. They want to read that. That's what's drawing them into reading. Also with graphic novels, it's a really big thing that parents are like, don't read comics. That's gonna like ruin your brain. For them at that age, actually, it's still exercising the basic literary skills of looking at words, but also exercising another type of reading skill, which is with images that actually signify something that with the plot. So when it comes to graphic novels or movies or books based on movies or whatnot, if you have like the younger readers who are just trying to get into the waters of choosing their own books, and that's what they're interested in, don't stop them. Let them read, because as soon as you say, you can't read that, and they say, well, why? Because it's not good, because it's trash. Then what you're signaling to them is that their reading choices are bad. And that's going to really crush their spirit. That's going to knock them down. And that's one of the fastest ways to shut down an emerging reader and turn them into a non-reader, is when you call the books that they like trash. Or when you say over and over again, no, don't read those. We don't want those. Like, like you can read better stuff. Like there's a time and place for a conversation like that. But for when they're not as engaged or they're resistant readers, whatever they are reading in that kind of way I would encourage. Just get them into the habit of wanting to read, because then as soon as you've established that habit or that confidence in them to want to read, then you can go on, to encouraging them to read other stuff. But don't just push Charles Dickens on them. Don't do it.
Really? A 12-year-old is enthralled by...
I mean, not everybody is going to be like the 10-year-old who picks up the Pickwick Papers off their dad's shelf. That was me. I didn't understand any of it, but I laughed out loud at one line, and that was like all I got out of the Pickwick Papers. But no, that's a very uncommon, that's a very uncommon experience. Yeah. That's only because our dad had those like great classics books and easy reach at home. Anyway, but when your child is more of an engaged reader and they're hungry to choose books, you can suggest titles if you wish, but if they're not interested, don't be offended, because there's a chance that they might come around to those. If they're picking their own books off the shelf, and you're not sure about what the story is about or whatnot, there's several things you can do. You can investigate the author. A lot of authors self-declare, or their agents declare the kind of stories that they love and promote. And so 100%. That'll give you a clear indication of who this author is and what they're representing. You can go to their social media pages too.
Yeah, it's all out there, and it's not usually hidden what their own personal perspective is, and you can start to make an assumption that like that perspective is going to carry into their book. So yeah, just identifying like who the author is. Yeah, and the author bio is like a really great way. That's so smart. Yeah,
and it's like they're trying to appeal to their audience, and they want their audience to see and notice them. So they want
to be authentic, right?
Yeah,
because they want to be showing that they're authentically pro whatever it is, and that it's going to be in their writing, that they're I don't know what the word is. It's slipping my mind. But yeah, so that's a great idea, actually. Just look at the author.
Yeah, and I mean, you can get some things from a back cover blurb. You can also go to mom blogs. A lot of moms are reading books and putting their own little statements out there in regards to if there's like a lot of violence or if there's relationship stuff. Hopefully, not too much smut, but that's getting in a lot of young adult books nowadays. Not to scare parents. That's just been a conversation in the publishing world recently. It is the beginning of the romantic
genre now. I feel like the young adult is leading into the romance novels because it is a more romantic. Yeah. They're more romantic inclined at that age, like they're coming into puberty.
The questions and the things that comes up in their lives, and unfortunately some of the things that have been sold as young adult, which can be targeted toward audiences as young as 12, are things that are like toxic relationships or going way too far.
Twilight.
God bless you. Absolutely. That's one of the examples, but even some of the more recent things that are pitched as young adult that go very extreme in depth of relationship that 12-year-olds probably don't need. So a lot of clues that you can find about it is just in the language used for the back cover or sometimes the online sales page has a bit of a deeper book, or like a deeper explanation of the book. But mom blogs can also give you an insight to some of like what's actually inside it. If you're still don't know and you're not sure, ask your reader. Like don't stop them out of joint if they're really curious and they really want to dive into it. But ask them, like, okay, how's the book going? What's it about? Like, oh, what happened? Like, just ask the questions, because that's going to do several things. One, it's going to show your kid that you are actually interested in what they're reading, and in not a judgmental, like, bent brow, gloomy, like, what are you reading sort of way. And so that's a point of encouragement for them. They're going to be more open with you and responding and telling you, oh, this is what I'm picking up on. This is like what they're gleaning from it. Even if maybe some of the things that are in the book that they're not picking up on, maybe there is some things that you as an adult reader would be like, whoa, encountering, but they must just not like see it or understand it.
It's subtler than...
Yeah.
So, like, 10 years ago agenda rather than, like, more
exactly.
modern publishing, which is not usually that subtle.
Absolutely no.
What if you're dealing with a kid that reads so fast and so much that you could never possibly research it all? Is there such a thing? Or is it that you recommend they stay with an author, like one author at a time, if they're going to read 5 books in 2 days?
I mean, I would caution against that. Only in the sense of, well, you don't want to be putting like another barrier on it where it's like you can read these but you can only read these. I mean, there might make that choice anyways, especially if it's a series and all of the series are out. There's one series that's like the Keeper of the Lost Cities, that just put out like book 9 or something. So your reader might just be really eager to continue on the same track because they want to know how the story continues with these characters. But at the same time, they might be like, I'm not as interested in that author. They might have had like a very blasé or mediocre experience with it. And so you don't want to say, well, you have to read the next book by this author. They might get burned out. They might return to that author, but you don't want to, like, again, that's another form of limiting their choices. So.
How dangerous do you think books can be?
I mean, knowledge is power, right? I think there are some things that if grown-ups are worried about how their young readers' minds are being formed by the books, some of the techniques that I've already mentioned, like look into the author, ask some questions about the book. And one thing that I absolutely promote that our dad did with me, that I didn't even realize he was doing at the time, it was genius, that you can help with readers, and I will actually answer the actual question about how dangerous books are, but I want to get around to this too, because this, I think, helped mitigate the fear of the danger of books and kids encountering it, is our dad would occasionally read the book either that I was reading with me at the same time or after me immediately. And I understand that you can't read all of your kids' books, especially not in advance. They read too fast and there's too much on your plate as a grown-up to be able to handle all of that reading all at once, even if you listen to audiobooks. But what my dad did was to read some of the books that he was less familiar with, I think, just to see what I was finding, himself kind of suss it out, and also just to talk to me about it. It showed me that he was interested in reading what I was reading and like going into that. So it was a conversation point for us that I really enjoyed. But it was more impactful for me when he read something that I thought was fine. It was like, oh yeah, I like this part of the story, that he did not like. And he was able to show me through that, oh, I can be a little more demanding of my books that I read. Like, I don't just have to accept that this is the way books are, that I have permission to stop reading a book if I find parts questionable or things that are going on with the story. It was because that he cared enough to read some books, to talk about them with me, and to show that he had a different opinion than I did. That actually got me to think a lot more critically about the books I was choosing, whether from the library or from the bookstore, especially what I was spending my money on. Because, yeah, books. There goes your wallet.
Yeah.
Like, Yeah, I mean, it's a great joke on Book Talk. Like, why am I broke? All of my books. I have a little bit of money, and I have all of these books that I haven't read on my shelf. What am I going to do? Buy more books, right? So, but
everyone loves a full bookshelf.
I think books can be some of the most influential things that you will encounter in your life, mostly because of that created experience that the author fashions for you. And there's a reason why some books have, become the classics that have made it to the school books, book lists. And it's a curious thing, right? That the quality of the book is that it outlives its author. Like there are a few, other than children, there are a few other things, but like great buildings of architecture, like that the greatest honor of quality you can find for a book is that its author is gone. But a lot of, depending on when you encounter a story, how much you know, how other people around you are facing it, what's happening in the world, the moment that you encounter a certain book could change your life. Absolutely. Or really influence you. So, and that can be for good or for ill, which is why it's important while you shouldn't shelter and limit your kids from choosing certain books that they are interested in reading, you should be actively engaged in looking at what they're reading. If you shut them down, if you call it trash, if you don't respect their choices, they're going to become non-readers. I have seen that in the classroom. I have seen it with students who have declared themselves to be non-readers. Like, I'm not a reader. I don't read. But then every other time I see them, they have their nose in a book. It's just not a book that they classify as like a worthy read, or like that opinion usually comes from an adult. And most of like the most highly influential adults in our kids' lives are their parents. And so if their parents demonstrate like a negative opinion, that's going to really influence. So just because you don't that's just because you allow them to choose their own books that they're curious about and interested in doesn't mean that you can't show interest, show engagement, and there's a beautiful bonding experience with reading, and it's not just from when you're like the older parent reading to your kids before they can read, but even talking about books, talking about literature, shared reading time, or like parent reading to child, that doesn't have to stop when they're just really little. Like, that's a beautiful bonding point. And that should continue even after your kids know how to read, I would say. So, books can be dangerous, but they can also really powerfully form you in the right direction. And it's our job not to shelter kids, but to teach them to be discerning in their choices. And the best way is like to investigate authors, to ask questions, and if you have an opportunity, read a book along with your kids and talk about it.
Like do an audit, kind of just a random audit.
Yeah, and it's and you don't have to like that. It's not for every single book, because that's again impossible. But even the couple of times that our dad did that with me, like that really influenced me. Impact. Absolutely, and it's like I remember that to this day, and it was very empowering for me to know that I had like that I was allowed to make the choice for my own books. But that it clued me in that I was able to look more intentionally at my books, and what I was reading. So that's what I would recommend.
Nice.
Anyway, did I answer the question?
I think so.
In a direct way.
The main question was, how do I pick books for my children? And the actual response, at least, maybe an expert response,
age appropriate time when they are past the point of picture books and needing help with learning to read and whatnot. When they are old enough to read on their own, they should be going to the shelves on their own. So
the answer is don't pick books for your children. So it's gonna always be a challenge. That's kind of parenting in general is gonna be a challenge. I have a hard time reading anymore just because there's just so much going on. And I have to say, if you're like so closely paying attention to what your children are reading, I hope that you're paying really close attention to who they're watching on YouTube, if they are on YouTube, because I think that we're only just starting to understand how important those influencers are in forming our children's perspectives.
Oh, yes.
And it might, in a way, be more dangerous than a book nowadays, because you're actually making a relation, like establishing a relationship with someone that is
who's a real life person.
Yeah, who's a real person.
Not just a character in a story.
But it's like a one-way relationship. Yeah, with someone that can evolve and can have a new opinion, who can make an argument without anyone presenting a counter argument.
Yeah.
Like, it's really very dangerous and also really thrilling what we have at our disposal when it comes to media nowadays. So I just thought it was a really interesting topic, and it's something that we struggle with for sure, because we have a very avid reader. Our oldest is, and honestly our second is not, because he likely has dyslexia. And so what we often classify as reading is a video game that has a lot of words. Like, and that you have to pay attention to like the words in order to know what to do. Like, that's
the choices to make.
Yeah, it's like we classify that as reading in our house because it's like we get anything we can, because we do want all of our children to love reading. I think every parent must. That must be our universal goal. I don't know if there's any parent that out there that would say, nah, I don't want them to like reading, or reading doesn't really matter. Like,
yeah, I've never heard that said.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me. And I guess I buried the lead. You are my sister, and you are an author. So we had you on, it's getting close to a year almost. It's like 8 months ago or so.
Yeah, it was February, right?
Yeah. So 9 months ago to talk about your book, which is Brio. And I hope people have been able to pick that up and check it out, because that is a fantasy lens independent reader book. Or is it young adult?
It's young adult.
Okay, young adult book.
Yeah.
And it isn't overtly Catholic, but it certainly comes from a Catholic worldview. And it portrays 2 young boy characters, which is kind of nice. Not, boy and a girl, or just girl characters. And I think that they're pretty authentic little boys. So people should check out Brio.
Oh, shucks.
And your publishing name is Crisscross.
Yes.
So Crisscross Brio, Crisscross with C's only. And thank you for joining me in lieu of Dale. We'll look forward to him returning next week and explaining where he's been.
Yeah.
But if you have any questions or feedback, you can email catholichitch@gmail.com. And I can include you in any feedback that we get. Anyone that wants to respond or says, well, no, you didn't think about this correctly, please engage. That's what we love. And otherwise, may the Lord guide and direct our journey.
Amen.
Nice. That's a good long one.
Hopefully I didn't blather on too much.
No, you're good. Bye. You slid totally out.
I did.
Unconsciously, you kept scooching backwards.
I was more just
I know, that's why I tilted this. I'm like, she's not going to be in there. She's trying to hide from you.
Well, I didn't even remember that the camera was there.
I know, right? Bye.